Scarlett Blade. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Silent Night, Memoirs of a Royal Guard, Chapter 12. It seemed that having a very special sun pony was not that much different than having a close friend. Iridescence and I still did the same things as before, but now we had a shared secret. That was also a higher percentage of time spent hugging, cuddling, and occasionally kissing. Beyond that, I now had the charge of being more considerate, whatever that meant. That day, Iridescence and I sat at the small table in our room playing a game. We were trying to ensure that our 4 deadly viruses didn't infect all of Equestria. It was going okay, but it was a sort of game that creeps up on you. Everything seemed to be fine, and then every pony suddenly died. There was a knock on the door, and then it opened. Our Sergeant Windchaser came in and said, "Good morning, ponies." She was a Pegasus, like me, and had been a royal guard for ages. Her mane and coat had long since started to gray, and most of us saw her as more of a den mother than a sergeant. That isn't to say she wasn't good at her job. She was. Her style was just far more friendly. I smiled and Iridescence said, "Good morning, Sergeant. What can we do for you today?" I hate to interrupt a game time, but I was actually looking for Silent Night. She pointed a hoof at me for emphasis. "Miley has come down with a nasty case of the flu. Would you mind starting your week early and working one more shift to cover for her?" Of course I wouldn't mind. I never minded doing my job. In fact, I loved it. Then I got a look from Iridescence. We had a quiet picnic planned for that day, our last day off before we went back to work. She had gone to great lengths to set it up. She was also the one that said we should keep our relationship quiet. If I said no, the sergeant may ask why. I thought, I'll make up some excuse, something believable like, I have an appointment. And that wasn't made up, it was true. "No problem, Sergeant." No, stupid, honest mouth. I felt the withering look of my unicorn companion. Sergeant Windchaser didn't seem to notice. She smiled and said, "I knew I could count on you. Thanks." Then she abandoned me to face Iridescence alone. Once the door was closed, Iridescence said, "No problem, Sergeant?" Navigating the conversation was going to require strategy, care, and bravery. I calmly laid my cards down. Had I said no, she may have questioned me, and you know better than any pony that I'm incapable of lying. I was following your instructions. "My instructions, huh?" she asked. "Yes, to keep things quiet, especially from the sergeant and officers." A reasonable defense. One thing I had learned about having a special sun pony was that being more considerate also meant not necessarily being logical. Iridescence gave me a look and then said, "In this case, I agree, although I feel like you always put your job first." She sighed. "It also really a shame. We had such fun plans." Of course I put the job first. It was our job. Picnics could wait. The princess needed protection. I didn't say anything besides, "I agree. Can we move it out a week?" She smiled. I love that smile. "I think we can. Everything but the food will keep. Just don't volunteer for any extra shifts if you can help it." "No problem," I said. And at that time, I had meant it. Miley Hooves. It seemed was not the innocent flu-stricken victim. She was, in fact, the harbinger of the plague. By midweek, 3/4 of Princess Luna's house guards were sick, including Iridescence and Sergeant Windchaser. I was filling in for every pony I could, plus tending to Iridescence, and on top of that, they made me acting sergeant. By technically, I had not volunteered for any more shifts. At that point, our officers pretty much expected those of us that had not yet fallen ill to pick up the slack. Things were getting so tight that they actually brought over trainees to do some of our basic guard work. Those ponies loved that. It was a dream come true, I'm sure, at least until they caught the flu. I stood in the background of Princess Luna's chambers while she and Princess Celestia discussed the recent business with Discord. Typically, I make it a point to not to eavesdrop on official business, which was easy that day since I was half asleep. I think they were discussing the possibility of rehabilitating someone, but then that didn't make a lot of sense. The discussion went on a while, and then I felt myself sway. I quickly stiffened back to attention. It was unprofessional. I felt ashamed, but also somewhat confused. Princess Celestia had just vanished. Alicorn magic was amazing. Princess Luna was laughing softly and looking at me. "Princess?" I asked cautiously. She smiled and said, "Fear not, Silent Night, we shall not tell." "Tell what?" The sun was substantially lower in the sky, and it dawned on me. "Princess, was I asleep?" "Verily, it looked as if thou needed it desperately, and we did not wish to disturb." She said warmly, "Be not ashamed, thou hast taken not too much for one pony." I was incredibly ashamed. Falling asleep on the job was the most embarrassing thing ever. A reprimand was in order. I would report myself to the sergeant, and soon my shift ended. A hoof lightly landed on my shoulder, and I found Princess Luna looking at me with concern. "Thou art most diligent guard that has not been able to take the appropriate time to sleep for days. Promise us that thou wilt get sleep tonight." The thought to argue procedure and duty briefly popped into my mind, but one look into Princess's eyes told me she would hear none of that. "Yes, Princess," I said. "I'd report myself, then go to sleep." The guard that relieved me, whoever he was, showed up right on time instead of early. I was too tired to comment on it. He looked pretty worse for wear, too. On the way to our room, I kept my head up, doing my best to look 100%. I still had to set a good example. Coming through the door, I found our room to be lightly lit. Iridescence was awake and reading. "How do you feel?" I asked her as I came over. Softly, I felt her foreleg and then picked up her pillow to fluff it. "Better. Still fatigued, but better." She looked at me with concern. I finished her pillow and set it behind her. "I'm glad." I smiled and went over to our table. I set out a parchment and started to write out my report. "What are you doing?" she asked. I set the pencil down with my mouth and explained, "I fell asleep on shift. I'm reporting myself to the sergeant." Iridescence tilted her head. "You're the sergeant right now." That was true. I was acting sergeant. "That will save some time, then," I replied. I awoke the next morning with a blanket over my shoulders, my head on the table, still in my armor, and completely stiff. Softly I groaned and shifted out of the chair. "Good morning," Iridescence said to me from her bed. "How long was I out?" I asked, worried that I was late for my shift. Iridescence lifted a hoof. "Easy there, champ. Only 6 hours or so. I slept most of it, too. I wasn't strong enough to get your armor off. Sorry about that." 6 hours. Thank goodness. I had plenty of time to do the sergeant's work and then get back to my post. "It's okay. You're sick. Thank you for the blanket. I'll go get breakfast for you." She smiled and said, "You don't have to do that." "No, but I want to," I said, and I did. I picked up her breakfast, snuck a quick shower in, filled out all the paperwork for the sergeant, and left her a note about falling asleep. I didn't have time for a normal write-up. She could decide what to do with that when she was well. On my way up to start my shift, Shining Armor stopped me. "Silent Night, a moment, please," he said, and I was concerned he knew about me sleeping, although I highly doubted Princess Luna would ever tell him. "You're putting in a ton of hours lately, taking up the slack for almost every other pony," he said. "I'm just doing my part, sir." He smiled and nodded. "I know, and now I'm doing mine. I requested some additional guards that can be trusted. They'll fill in for house guard for a few weeks, effective immediately. You're off guard duty. You're acting sergeant, and a sergeant doesn't have time to stand guard for 12 hours a day." I like standing guard. Being with the princess never felt like work. She was a wonderful pony. At least I was only temporary. I nodded. "Yes, sir. Who is taking my shift today, then?" "The ponies won't arrive until tomorrow, so today it will be me." he said. You, sir? I asked, surprised. He laughed. Yes, Silent Night, I still remember how to do the job. He winked at me and said, Get some rest. You look awful. Your temporary guards will report tomorrow, and you'll need to be on your A game to ensure they are up to the task. Yes, sir, I said and turned to go. He was a good officer. Thank you, sir, I called after him before heading back to the room. I snuck in quietly, which was unnecessary because it was still daytime. Iridescence looked up from her book. Did you quit? She asked, knowing perfectly well I never would. Struggling to get my armor off, I huffed. The captain took my shift, bringing in new guards temporarily, still sergeant. Kicking off the hoof guards, I decided I'd worry about where they landed tomorrow. I crawled into my bed, and it had never felt so wonderful. That was nice of him. I vaguely heard Iridescence say, followed by my response of, mm-hmm. We discussed a few more things, and I don't really recall what. The sweet talk from my pillow was much more interesting, and I fell for its siren's call. The next morning I felt wonderful. I was fueled by a full night's rest and the fact that Iridescence was feeling much better. She still wasn't able to work, but she was back to her usual self at home. She even helped me put my armor on. There, you look perfect, she said before straightening my helmet. Ready for your big day as sergeant? I frowned a little at that. It's only temporary. Then I can go back to being your partner in guarding the princess. She actually bonked me in the nose with her hoof. Temporary leads to permanent, and Windchaser will retire sooner or later. You don't want to stand guard forever, do you? I wriggled my nose and shrugged. I wouldn't mind. You're more of a sergeant than I am. You can talk to ponies. Again, she bonked me. I'm not going to be a guard forever, but I suspect you are. Now, go out there and be the best sergeant ever. For emphasis, she gave me a little kiss. I preferred that to being bonked. I flushed, put on my sergeant's face, and went out to meet the temporary replacements. The group was clearly comprised of some of the best Royal Guard ponies from around Equestria. They were also completely misfit. No two had exactly the same armor. Each was slightly different based on their region and unit. It may have looked a mess, but it didn't make sense to issue armor only temporarily. Good morning. I am Silent Night, acting sergeant. You've been selected to temporarily fill the house guard for Princess Luna. We have 3 simple rules here. As long as you follow them, we'll get along just fine. 1. She is not Nightmare Moon. Don't mention that name. Don't joke or ask about it. Forgive, forget. 2. You are a house guard. There is no different than Princess Celestia's house guard. It carries the same honor and responsibility. Act accordingly. Set a good example for others. 3. My door is always open. If you need me, do not hesitate to ask. Do you understand our rules? The group of ponies said in unison, Yes, Sergeant. I nodded. Good. I posted your shift schedules outside my office. You start tonight. If you're not on shift, be sure to take in sights of Canterlot. It won't be time wasted. Dismissed. The group filed off to do their jobs. Perhaps being a sergeant might be for me after all. I could always look in on Princess Luna. Of course, it also meant more danger for Iridescence and my career. You can't be with a pony of a different rank that you supervise, especially one that reports to the exact same comrade. I frowned at that and turned my head to the office. Shining Armor was right behind me. I sprung to attention and saluted instead of crashing into him. He saluted back. Nice work, he said. You'll make a fine sergeant. Not yet, sir. Haven't gotten the pony skills down yet. Still learning the life outside the job part, I replied. Shining Armor looked a bit surprised by that. Surprised and impressed. Every pony does things differently. You're just more by the book. Sooner or later, your chance will come. Today, however, acting sergeant is fine. Acting sergeant and guard first class. He levitated a small box out of his pack and opened it. There was a small silver pin inside that featured 2 dark blue diagonal bars. He placed the single bar on my breastplate with the new one and set the old one into the box. Closing the lid, he offered it to me and said, "Congratulations. You've earned this." I accepted and said, "Thank you, sir." The captain headed off to his commitments, and I made my way to Winchester's office to do mine. Silent Night, Guard First Class. That had a nice ring to it. Author's note: I want to say thank you to all the wunderbar readers and commenters that have been following along. I really enjoy writing the story, and I'm still going strong. Well then, I hope you guys have had a wunderbar day.